Hey everyone, this is Eric Bahn, one of the co-founders at Hustle Fund, which is an early stage venture capital firm. Welcome to today's session in partnership with HackerNoon called Storytelling for Startups. So storytelling is a craft that I've just come to appreciate somewhat recently, really in the past several years or so. And here's what the evolution has been like for my journey, at least. In my 20s, I thought that if you build a great product, users will come, kind of like Field of Dreams style, if you remember the 90s. And it turns out that didn't really work well for me as a founder. And then I realized a little bit later that everything was sales, and not just in transaction form, like trying to sell my Honda Odyssey to my friend David, whom I'm just going to introduce in a moment, but also in convincing people to align around your mission. That was a little bit of a better approach. But then in my 30s, I realized that it's not really just about sales. Everything is great storytelling driven by deeper empathy with the people around you. That's where you can build meaningful relationships and long-term value. It's something I now practice every day in working with my own founders, my family and friends, as well as leading the fundraising for Hustle Fund. So today we're going to dig a bit deeper into this topic of storytelling with my awesome co-host for this session, David Smooke. David is the founder of HackerNoon, which is an awesome tech media company that reaches 5 to 8 million readers per month. David himself has written 276 stories for HackerNoon, has fundraised nearly $3 million for his company, and attracted and inspired over 35,000 contributing writers to participate in the HackerNoon ecosystem. And what's going to happen is David and I are going to have a conversation focused on the art of storytelling, but we invite you, our listeners, our viewers today, to participate as well. So if you have a question for us, please put your question in the Q&A section of the Zoom webinar, not the chat. The chat can get a little bit hard to follow, but the Q&A section. And we're going to try to reserve about 10 to 15 minutes at the end of this session to cover as many of your questions as possible. David, sir, it is so awesome to do this with you. You've built an incredible career in media. So I want to start with the hardest and also the simplest question, which is, what makes for a great story?
Hey, Eric, a great story is remarkable. So I think that's kind of the first thing that starts with picking a better adjective than great, because great can mean so many different things to everybody else. But in business, like, do people talk about it? Is there word of mouth? And that's where I think it starts with being remarkable. I mean, hearing you go through your whole intro was kind of funny because, like, in my teens, I want to be a writer. And then in my 20s, I build a business for writers, and it's like, oh, now you're not the writer, but you're building a business for it. And it ends up flipping around. And life's funny like that, I guess. And people that can tell good stories, you'll want to stick around them. If you're going to pick, it's just, if without a good story, your brain doesn't work. There's nothing that really exists entirely in a vacuum. So we're all building stories all day, and we're trying to make sense of this world. And so the ability to be a good storyteller and be a good communicator is just going to make you a lot of money. You can see everywhere that people are exchanging value, that the people that are telling the good stories are winning. And those are the ones that you're listening to. So I think objectively, like input, output, when I think of a great story, I come back to the word remarkable. It's something like the first time I got a job for an internet company, I got a job at Smart Recruiters, and my CEO is Jerome Turnick. And the first thing he told me was, this is remarkable. This is what you should do on social media. If people remark about it, you grow your presence on the media itself. So that one always kind of stuck with me. And I guess I'm still remarking about it today.
Okay, I want to dig into this notion of remarkable. So there's something that kind of struck me when I was kind of reviewing the fact that there's so many people in HackerNoon's contributing ecosystem. By the way, if you haven't checked out HackerNoon before in the audience, go to hackernoon.com. It is one of my favorite sites. I think it's got this great kind of like long form, highly technical like vein that I really get attached to. And I do find the stories to be really remarkable. But when you're coaching, let's say, a contributing writer, maybe someone that hasn't been as deep in the craft as you have for so long, what are some of the key things that you consistently coach for those writers to try to make their stories more remarkable?
Yeah, so I mean, we've thought about this a lot, because every story goes through a human editor. We made an editing protocol that you can see at editingprotocol.com, and we commit 30 minutes of professional editing time to every story that we publish. So there are things that, like, we want to tell them in notes how to improve, and you want, like, you want to give people feedback, so that it works and it's worth their time. I mean, even getting towards the basics of just like, what is this post? Does it have an H1? Does it have an original image? And then coming back to the pillars of journalism of who, what, when, where, why, how, and just getting into, okay, ask yourself, read your story again when you're done with it, and then go through those 5 words. Who does it matter for? How does it help? If you're talking about, you just built something new, now you could write a story about how it's built, and other builders like that are interested in, but that may not be your end customer, but it still may be a good post to write. So there's elements of trying to say, what happens in my daily life and my business that can plug into a bigger story? You see all these companies releasing data, and they're doing it to ride the wave of the bigger story. If you have any insight on the job market, you can now share that data when the jobs report comes out, and every month for the Labor Bureau, and you're now, in that story somehow, kind of moving towards the edge of it, And our site's always been more successful with how, and how of the 5, how is like just the most interesting to people that build and hack things and makers, and so that it fits me a little bit. But you finding your niche, a lot of times it could be why or who. The celebrity sites are all who, and the tabloids are all who, and that's all they're doing, is riding those other people's waves. So I don't know, how do you make a story better? It depends on the story itself and where it's at and where it starts.
Well, I want to talk about like feedback loops here. So I lead the fundraising for Hustle Fund, and so much of my first pitches are actually done just like this on Zoom. And the benefit of Zoom is that you can be in a room with people who are considering investment with you, but they don't know that they're playing poker with you. So as a result, their tells are very obvious. Like an obvious tell would be like, I'm pitching David for some money, and he's just like sort of just like doing this a little bit. I'm like, okay, I'm losing his interest, or he's yawning, or he just looks bored as hell. So like a benefit that I have in my storytelling is that I get real-time feedback. I can say like, okay, he's looking kind of bored. What if I inject a different kind of story? What if I try to snap him out of it with a joke or something? What I've always admired about like the endurance, I think, of HackerNoon is that the stories are consistently really engaging, at least for audiences like me. But how are you getting those feedback loop cycles that like the things that you're trying to coach your contributors to write about actually are producing the results that you need for the business?
Well, I mean, readership is good. If we have readership, the whole engine keeps going. It means there's an ad on the story page. More people want to get readership, so they come in, and the machine kind of keeps working. So there's some elements of it. It can be as simple as time on site or page views as a feedback loop. So a lot of the notifications we're building are looking at how much time people spend reading your story and saying, hey, this is how long they spend on the page. That information is really useful. And, what type of stories do they like to read? What tags are they interested in? What other tech topics? So that's like kind of being a platform is also like being a facilitator, and I'm just summarizing everyone else on the other side of the screen for you. That's what I can do as a platform, of how long they spend on it, what type of people they are, and then they'll see comments, social media updates. So you're kind of getting a feedback loop around your story from email, from the site itself, and from your other social networks. So I think that stuff like generally works. Commenting is still, I think, the purest form of internet feedback. The comment itself is a new original word that didn't exist before, and it definitely wouldn't have happened if the story didn't happen. So I think in terms of feedback loops, like comments are kind of the coolest, just the coolest thing about the internet, because there is something of like, even 30 years ago, you publish a whole book and your agent is like the one feeding you like a couple of lines of feedback, and maybe you're lucky enough to get a book review about you, and like you don't get much feedback at all as a writer. Now it's like you haven't even finished your post and someone's sending something back to you. So there is a bombardment of the internet that like maybe it's too much. And like with social networks themselves, my personal philosophy is just trying to move away from the consumption of the feed and use the network to distribute my own thoughts. And so that's a really tough thing to actually do, because they're designed to feed you the content first. I think, you just get there and there's a bunch of new stuff there and you're a little like, oh, suddenly I spent 8 minutes. Suddenly I spent 12 minutes. What was I doing? So the more like in your life, you can just get towards the creation side of the internet and not the consumption side, you're gonna get further in your career.
Oh, I got a question about like the publication kind of strategies here too. And this is actually a very tactical question that I didn't prepare you in advance about. So I've been noticing an interesting trend when it comes to feedback loops with some of the press that we engage with at Hustle Fund, which is they might feature us in a story. And then I might see, based on some feedback that they get, different permutations of titles that they then to test. Like it might be like, oh, like how Eric raised like $100 million. And then they might end up with like how this like one VC like, you know, did this thing that eventually got them $100 million. Does HackerNoon editorial team also use those kinds of feedback loops to make permutations of articles that go live? And yeah, and I guess why or why not?
We definitely put a lot of thought into before the moment it goes live. You know, so
Okay.
we're not Mr. Beast with a YouTube thumbnail, and we don't have that immediate like, oh, it's live for 10 minutes, and I've learned from these first 10 million people about what to
Yeah.
do. You know, so that's like we're not, each story, you know, 500, 1,000 reads is kind of the bottom of you know, what to expect. So, I mean, it's the title itself, you know, we have editors that are spending time on it. We have titles. We have like a whole editorial handbook, you know, of like how to title and how to headline. You know, the headline and the feature image are the two things that are going to start the trajectory of where the story will go. That's the first two things you see when it's on a third-party site. And that's kind of starting with, are those both original? Very simple. Like once you're using the stock photography on the images, you're killing a whole wave of distribution paths that you don't have access to anymore. You know, because it's not an original image. If you post it somewhere else, everywhere else on the internet files it as, boom, that's another image that has already existed, and you should go to Getty or Unsplash for it, or whoever owns those companies these days. And it's so that the headlines will have the edit. Usually they're human written, but we'll have AI read every story draft and suggest 5 different headlines. So the editor themselves can kind of just see 5 options, 6 options really, because the writer comes in with 1, and then the AI gives them 5 more, and then the editor makes the final call. So that's kind of what we've learned, you know. And I guess in terms of how well they come back, a lot of times like repeat structures and anecdotes will stick with us. But the word I always come back to is specificity when it comes to headlines. And that's where you can avoid, because if you optimize just for views, you're going to end up a clickbait site. There's no path, you know, you can't have the same, if you have the logic of it just matters how many people click it, and not if they're satisfied once they click it, or if they're a person you want on your site, you know, they fit like the rest of the site, you know. So I think, I mean, what it's like to learn JavaScript in 2016 was one of our very first breakthroughs. And now every year someone's kind of rewritten it. And it's just, you know, going through like how difficult it is to like how many different packages you have to do. And the difference of what does it mean to learn JavaScript in 2016 versus 2022 versus 2010. You know, it was a very different experience of what a JavaScript developer was. And even in those, you know, 5-year differences. So that title, that structure does viral, and people imitate it, you know. And then it's not even us. Sometimes it's us consciously trying to title towards it. Other times it's just, hey, I see that post on HackerNoon and I could be that guy. I'm going to write a story like that, but a little different.
Yeah. Well, now I feel like we should have made our title more clickbaity, like 15 steps for great storytelling. Number 13 will shock you. Join us in the conversation with David. So, all right, I kind of want to shift gears slightly on one thing related to fundraising. So I got a lot of great questions. We came up with a lot of good topics to cover for today. So it sounds like you have it really dialed in with HackerNoon. I see you guys with such relevance all the time, you know, with the stories that y'all are producing. And I know that you took you're the person that was in lead for raising much of the capital for HackerNoon's history. Where did storytelling and the skills that you learned, at least on the journalist side, apply to the fundraising side? And what do you think actually really worked and maybe didn't work from those experiences and permutating those skills to fundraising?
Well, I never really wanted to take other people's money. I wanted to take my customers' money. That's like been my, you know, what I want to do. But you know, money is money, and so you definitely, fundraising is way easier. You know, it's not way easier, but you have different doors that open that bootstrapping doesn't. So, you know, I bootstrapped the first 2.5 years of this business when it was just me, and it was just me and my wife Ling, and contractors. And then we decided to do equity crowdfunding. And we talked to a couple venture capitalists first, but they're like, there's 2 people on this project and neither of them are software developers. And you want to tell us how to build a content management system? It's like, yes, we do. that is what we want to do. So, the venture capital route in the beginning for us didn't go great at all. And, the story wasn't something that they were looking for. So we went with equity crowdfunding because we had a large community. So our goal was to turn our readers into our shareholders.
Mhm.
And we raised about $1 million. And you can type in HackerNoon Start Engine and see kind of our page and what our story was. And that, it took a while to make that page. Like it's a lot of detail. It's way more than a deck, even though a deck takes a lot too. I'm not saying a deck is bad. It's like you're trying to package your story for different mediums. And for crowdfunding, you want to put it all out there. You operate a little bit like a public company. And now we send them 20 pages of shareholder letters a year of detailing, all the things we're working on and what we're going towards our money. So that was it's a great exercise, to put yourself in a page. And at first, like someone else wrote it that wasn't me or Ling, and it was like, what is this company? I don't get it.
Oh, was it like a consultant that does crowdfunding that you guys initially worked with?
Well, Start Engine, their CEO Howard Marks was a HackerNoon contributor, so that's kind of how I found out about them. And crowdfunding just became legal in like 2016 for equity for non-accredited investors. So as little as $100, you could buy shares of HackerNoon. So it was a little bit of a different time. And the Start Engine, they wrote the V1 of it. We're like, yeah, we want to do this with you, and they wrote it, and I was like, no, let's just start over, do it again. And it was a lot of fun. And the other fundraising we've done has been more strategic, integrations. Like Arweave was the most recent, and we backed up our entire library on their blockchain. And for $58, we can back up a billion words on the Arweave blockchain, and now it lives as a third-party address. And you can use a wallet address to access any HackerNoon story. Wow. And it's a pretty sweet use of backing up text. So the people we can integrate and build with, it just aligns the incentives right away. So I'm much more. I haven't really liked. I think venture capital is very exciting. I think it's really cool, but I don't like the discrepancy of I want to build my business forever, and you want me to sell my business. And it doesn't mean that's what a venture capitalist is going to be motivated to operate from, but it does mean let's be honest about where the money comes from, and the exits are that's where the funds are made, or going public. And it's just so I think those incentives are a little tough. And we've kind of tried to get technology companies as shareholders, but whoever the shareholder is, they have to believe in the story. That doesn't change with any of it. It's going a direction. If they don't understand the story, there's nothing to buy.
So I want to distill back basically what I'm hearing here, which is maybe it was less of like a storytelling hacking kind of exercise, but more about identifying who the right audience was. That would be the right kind of fit to serve as an investor in HackerNoon. And I think that's a really great distinction, which is VC works in some scenarios of, really rapid growth, like high capital expenditure and a race to kind of win based on a competitive market and all that stuff. And there's definitely situations where it feels like it's antagonistic towards the aims of the founder. Like if you're trying to build an enduring business where there isn't necessarily a specific timeline for exit, you want to grow at a very specific kind of pace of your choosing as a founder, less so what the VC market is, then it's not a great fit. I'm glad that you guys were pretty self-aware and picked up on that pretty quickly, because it can turn into a pretty annoying exercise if you pick up a VC that has expectations that are misaligned to what you're building. So let's do this. I just want to remind folks, we're about 20 minutes into this conversation with David Smooke, founder of HackerNoon. If you have any questions for me or David, we're going to reserve 10-15 minutes at the end. Direct those to the Q&A section of the Zoom webinar, and I'll try to get through as many and serve them up to David as we can. I want to really switch gears now and go back to AP English. Okay, so I remember when I was taking AP English, and I don't think I did that great. There's this concept that did stick with me that I think about when it comes to storytelling, which is pathos, ethos, and logo. So really quick, pathos is sort of like the emotional connection that you feel as part of a story. Ethos is the credibility of the author who's delivering the story. and why what they're an authority on maybe telling the story. And then logos is the logic, right? So in my world as a VC, pathos is, I like getting emotional connections from like, why is this like a core passion of yours? Why are you like a missionary in trying to solve the given problem, startup founder? Ethos is like, what is your background to show that you have the credibility to actually create this? Like, are you a scientist or pharmacist that's trying to create like a COVID vaccine or something like that? I want to see what kind of authority you have. And then logos is the logic, like what is the opportunity? So pathos, ethos, logos. I know it's been a while since either of us took AP English, but I wonder if these are elements that your team also considers as elements of a good story, because this is so important for me when I do fundraising or even assessing a founding team. What does it look like for you in your realm of running HackerNoon?
Cool. Yeah, that's the Greeks. They always come back to the Greek words. Whenever, when in doubt, just go deeper.
It makes you sound smart, at least.
I mean, my dad was a pathologist, so I always pathos. Being the studying of suffering. Is also how I've kind of looked at it a little.
Oh, interesting.
Shaded my view a little bit. I mean, who in the ethos and trusting people. Who's writing the story is huge for us. It's just who is the biographer. And it comes, okay, so we'll get submissions. They'll say, hey, I'm with this company. I want to publish my announcement. It's like, who owns the content? Is it a company or is it a person? Okay, if a company owns the content, now you have to talk about the company as the author because they own it. It's theirs. You may have written it, but if the company owns it, it's theirs. So, and that means it's trusted in a different way. Because if I say the company is the author, you understand this is company news by the company, and it's not an individual's opinion. Because it's been it's gone through the process that marketing content does at a company. So I think the who of relating to the story is essential. Who is the author?
Yeah.
Is just, and then that's something where like I think we're honest by saying if it's already appeared on a company blog, it has to be the company as the author because it's theirs. And it's biased to say it's David. Well, not really, because it's HackerNoon that owns the content in that analogy. So what makes a good story? Logic in it becomes with a lot of the how-to and the technical side of it. So I guess if you look at every site and you kind of move it towards pathos, lothos, or egos, we're probably between logos and ethos. So that would be my guess. But I didn't make AP English. I wasn't in high school. I wasn't good enough to be an AP English. I was in the AP Maths.
Well, I mean, HackerNoon is a little bit different, right? Because this isn't like this is very different from like, let's say, long form journalism from like the Atlantic or something, right? Where you're like opining about like, some sort of like societal change thing. I mean, there's some elements of that too. And this is actually something I
occasionally, every now and then we opine.
Yeah, there's some of that, but I really like the purest kind of rationality behind like the writers, right? Like they're often engineers, at least the ones that I read about. But this actually is a kind of an extension of this question, which is, do you find, and this is not necessarily a HackerNoon specific question, but like in storytelling, just generally in our industry, is there a little bit too much logos? And I'll give you an example of this, like. Some of the stuff like in like Web3, a lot of times they end up being like highly technical, like, well, okay, here's like some quantitative strategy for like why this like thing is going to change this way, or like market adoption. Like it's good and it seems credible and I appreciate it, but it's not like a great story, right? Like I'm curious about like, what my mom is going to do with this stuff when like, are we become like the default standard for like storage and things like that. And I do think there is a story there, but I guess like, HackerNoon does index a little bit more logos because I think maybe the audience that you're serving, but yeah, just generally, is there too much logos?
Generally, I think people should be betting more on ethos. I think your assumption is pretty much right, and they want to see the human on the other side of the screen. And especially as AI is growing and it's in people's minds more, like knowing that the real human is there and that human connection is going to keep being worth more. So I think if your stories are very heavy, if you say, hey, I don't know if I should post that thing about what I did with my kid. It's like, oh, usually I post my business stuff here. And then you see like, oh, this post went viral, not because it's about my business. It's about like, they recognize that, oh, I'm a CEO and a human. And I'm not, it's like just recognizing that you're a human now, I think goes a long way in this trust of your business and your story. So I think where we fit in is a lot more like we're growing people's careers, like they're documenting how they did something or why they did something, and it comes back to their business, but it's a story around their business. So I mean, what do you think? Are you seeing anyone like business leaders whose kind of updates do you like reading right now? Like what kind of business leaders are you reading?
So it's interesting because I don't really read that much business stuff. So you and I are in some ways like opposite worlds. Like I do love I'm not gonna say this enough. It's just like I love reading HackerNoon articles if I need to learn something like a little bit more technical, because I do think that the long form craft is something I just enjoy. But like much of my like personal study is actually usually on the pathos side of things. So here's the reason why. When you're a pre-seed stage investor like myself, or like an angel, or anyone dealing with early stage, you have to get comfortable making decisions when there's no data. Like it's like me and David, we're starting a company together. We're gonna like create some sort of like AI writing tool or something like that. We might have ethos. So like David could say like I'm building this company for a long time, and Eric like had media businesses before this too. That's why we're here. But there isn't like any like LTV to CAC ratios, like 5-year trailing EBITDA, like none of the stuff that demonstrates like clear product market fit exists yet. And it's more of a bet on like this is a team that can build something interesting. And largely that gets answered by how they envision constructing the company, which, yeah, it has like logos in there too, but a lot of it's sort of like that pathos of just like, I was working on HackerNoon, or Eric was working on this media business for so long. And like the thing that we always struggled with was like this one thing that kept on blocking our team. And we figured out a solution for that one thing. And then we realized like if we do this, we can unleash like millions of people who could be great writers on their own right to share like what's inside their minds. Something along those lines. So a lot of fiction for me. A lot of stand-up comedy is frankly like one of the, I think, best forms of pathos-driven storytelling.
I did John Mulaney's last night.
No way, really. That guy has been on a journey. Okay, so
Yeah.
just a quick stuff like his like abuse, drug abuse, and like all that stuff, his recovery.
Oh yeah, the most recent special walks you through the whole thing.
Yeah, it's
just going into rehab, what it's like coming out.
But that's an interesting one, because like the thing that makes John Mulaney so great as a comedian is his vulnerability.
Yeah.
So maybe we could talk about this a little bit. HackerNoon. Okay, so like talking about a lot of things like this, we didn't mention vulnerability as like maybe a key component of great storytelling yet. And is it applicable in the work that you do every day? How do you treat vulnerability or even coach it?
As a founder, I mean, vulnerability is very tough. You're dealing with payroll, income, like it's all these different things that people are depending on you. So it can be tough to decide what to share and what not to share. What the same with your shareholders as well, and your community. Like when you make shifts in software, you switch out providers. Like I do a sunsetting post, it's like, oh, it failed. Yeah, but I'm documenting that it failed, and I'm telling you why it failed, and I'm going to move on and replace it with something else, or just pivot the business a little towards, away from that thing that didn't work that well. So there's definitely, I think, the more open you are, generally the better off you are, because even if you're going through it, you're going through it. And so it's just a matter of how many people are in there with you. And if you're too vulnerable, yeah, it's going to distract from your business, and you could overshare, but you can recalibrate. I mean, my wife is posting way more on social media than me. And sometimes I'm like, oh, do you need to do that? And it's like, well, she has all this community growing around her.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's not about them. It's about her, it's about us. This is our story. We're telling it, and you can listen or not listen. It doesn't really matter to us.
Yeah.
And so I think founders and CEOs, tech people, they're coming to us to host a story and get it out there. And sometimes it's vulnerable, but a lot of times we end up on the house side of it. And the other sites can be a little more like, get your feelings out, I guess. But I think all stories, no matter what type, there's some level of vulnerability, or there's no relation. You have to have some appreciation of the character, that like if they're two-dimensional and you don't understand their motivation, it doesn't matter. So that bio and all your social media profiles, all your business bios, you should be thinking a lot about what that sentence says. That is a very important thing towards telling your story. And I think the more you share your problems, they're not going to go away if you don't share them. So you might as well give it a shot, and be open and be transparent.
Well, let me give you an example of, I think, a founder in the Hustle Fund portfolio who I think leveraged vulnerability in a really great way. So there's a company called Juna. You can check them out at heyjuna.com. And it's basically mail ordered sexually transmitted infection testing. Okay, so STIs. So the idea behind this is like, especially if you're like a sexually active or even younger, and you're a little bit embarrassed about going to like clinics to get tested, this is a much more private solution to get that kind of testing done. What always impressed me is that one of the founders, when they pitched us, was like, I got an STI when I was in college, right? And this is what my experience was like. And I love the fact that he led with that, because it is, on the one hand, like, could come off as a little bit embarrassing, right? Like it's this thing that he had to deal with, but then like it tied very closely to the mission of like, this is why I'm doing this stuff.
Yep.
Is that so like people like myself don't have to feel embarrassed. By the way, June is doing great right now. It turns out that there are many people that kind of connected, I think, to that sort of pathos, and you can sort of kind of sense those vibes on the website too, of just like, this is a like something that really matters to our team, and this is why we're producing that service. And they're finding their success, which is really amazing. Now, I don't know if like, when you're pitching to a VC, you need to, go into that kind of level of detail about like your personal health histories or things like that. But here's I think like a different kind of like version of this question, which is, I'll wrap it around some context. I have a life mantra that I try to follow, David, which is, when you bow to the mirror, the reflected image bows back. And this, it's not something I made up. This is actually like a Buddhist saying: when you bow to the mirror, the reflected image bows back. And the way that I interpret that is just that the way that you treat your environment will naturally be reciprocated in kind. So if I'm like a total asshole to David right now, like, like karma is going to just like bounce back asshole
me.
at me.
It won't be me. It's the
Only to David. The rest of the HackerNoon
take care of it for me.
Exactly. Lynn, she's great. But like, but if I treat people with like, vulnerability, love, like authenticity, that tends to get reciprocated back. And a goal that I have, just like as like an entire goal, like when I'm pitching someone or trying to connect with them, is, can I get to a level of some level of vulnerability on both sides? Right? Because normally if there's like that kind of sense of connection, it's a good sign that this is a person with great EQ, someone that we can have like a really good, honest, like foundation of conversations. It's not going to feel very transactional when I deal with them. So, that's kind of where I'm sort of heading with the vulnerability side of it. And I wonder, whether your colleague also has some perspectives on adding to the not to blow him up.
Oh, that's all right. My dad, I guess he's stopping by for lunch.
Great. Hey,
David's dad. Leanne's eyes. She got bit by a bee on her eyelid.
Oh, wow.
We've been at Vale Hospital. She'll be in a second.
Oh, my.
Do you have a kid that got a bee sting?
My mother got a bee sting.
Oh, no. Okay. Wow. I'm like, speaking of vulnerability, I'm so sorry about that. But David, do you want to go address that?
They'll come back if they need me. They said
sure. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. One sec.
Yeah. Go ahead, please. Please focus on that. So sorry to the audience that David's mom is going through that, but I think I'll just sort of continue the point here, right? So many of you out there who are listening, if you're especially part of the Hustle Fund audience, and maybe some of the HackerNoon audience, are going to be first-time founders. And this gets a little bit uncomfortable. Where I find is that a lot of first-time founders, especially if they're a little bit younger, tend to index really hard into logos and ethos. They're like, I graduated from Stanford, and like, I'm going to create like this like great thing, and here's all the logical reasoning behind it. And actually, like the pathos side of it, like creating a little bit of vulnerability, like explaining why this is a personal mission, it can get a little bit hard for people to get comfortable within their own skin to reveal a little bit of that, because being vulnerable is really uncomfortable. Anyway, David, just catching you up. We're sort of talking a little bit
my
about...
update is the bee sting looks bad, but they got medicine. We're all good.
Oh, good. Okay, so your mom's gonna be all right, I hope.
She's healthy. Well, she has a bee sting on her eye. It looks a little...
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, like a little fun, but she's gonna be... She had medical care and everything. But the founder, that you were speaking of, that they're like their ideal customer for their own products. Yeah. I think it goes both ways of like, that can be a good choice or a bad choice. because like Tom, from MySpace, it's like he was like you get a friend and your first friend is Tom, so he's
Yeah.
the example of how to network and connect. But in the end, his company didn't win the social networking game, and I remember I met with
Interesting.
one founder, and he wanted to make this really good drink, like protein drink for after working out, and it was different than his. And he was considered calling it goat piss, and because people remember it. And my line to him was like, do you really want to say the word goat piss like 10,000 times over the next 3, 5, 7 years, and keep talking about it. So I go back and forth on whether like you as a founder, you should be the ideal customer or clientele for your thing. It's nice for the story, but you end up pigeonholing yourself, and it's like the thing can only be as big as you because it's still you're about it. But in the seed stage, it's whatever. If you're betting on the person, and the goal is that them walking in with the problem solution thing in the beginning isn't it won't matter in the future. It matters now because they're speaking to venture capital and the business doesn't exist yet, but in the future, the product itself hopefully will become, bigger than their story.
Yeah. Really quick, to David's mom, I hope you're feeling better. Yeah, glad you got your care. Just speaking of vulnerability too, one thing I sort of did enjoy about this exchange we just had is, I work in my garage, and I actually have a policy where my kids are always allowed to come into the garage at any time, and they're welcome to sit in. I just asked them to not like contribute too much if like it's kind of a tense meeting with an LP or something like that. They generally have a sense of that. But for me, like I tend to find that it's kind of nice to just reveal and like I don't have my background or anything. This is my real garage, but it's kind of, I think, something that naturally invites more vulnerable conversation too. When they're like, "Is that your daughter?" I'm like, "Yeah." Like, "Stella, come over here, say hi," and so forth. Just to remind people that we're really human. And I guess like this last point around like vulnerability, and before we switch gears, is that it's a good reminder of those kinds of moments, just what we had right now. But also, like, if my kids decide to pop in, although it's a little bit early, they should be in school. I'll be very angry actually if I see them, be like, "Why aren't you in school?" But it's a good reminder that there's human beings on this side, right? And like, I can't tell you like how hard it is sometimes, where founders can sometimes, maybe it's going to sound wrong and very narcissistic, so just bear with me, everyone, but like put like VCs or investors on a pedestal. Like, we're just as flawed humans as everyone else. All right, like we're struggling like with childcare just like you. I mean, like it's the same thing, but I also like just exposing that reality on both sides, right? It makes for something that's, "Hi, David's mom. We're very proud of David. You did a great job raising him, by the way. We love David. Hello."
Isn't he?
Yeah. Hope you're feeling better. I'm glad that you got the care you got. Yes. Yeah. Anyway, but it's so sweet, right? And I think that's, bye, have a good one. I think it makes like even moments like this really special, and it's just reminding people. And I think this is what HackerNoon does really well. And actually, in all the interactions I had with you, David, and your team, which is just like remembering that they're real humans on the other side. Right? Yeah.
I mean, I moved my home office downtown to not have those interactions though, and it still kind of happens.
It's great though.
So I like it. When I had my second kid, he took over the home office. I caved his room now. But I mean, my wife Ling is still working at home most days. Just sit in the kitchen, and you'll see the kids come in and out. And I think, I mean, we were remote before the pandemic, but like it has. Like, what is the etiquette around remote? It's new. I remember right as the pandemic was starting, we were getting so many submissions about how remote work should work, and it just became this trending thing of everyone kind of sharing their tips of how to do it. And it's if you were in person here and my kid was here, they would be a part of the meeting. So it's what's it mean now that it's on the screen instead? So it's complicated. I don't know the answer for it. I just need to make sure I get enough time in front of that keyboard to get it as well, and not doing too much time taking meetings.
Yeah, but I got to say that I haven't been able to look at the chat too closely, but there have been a lot of folks, fans of the HackerNoon community for quite some time, saying like they're so excited to actually see you speaking at a session like this. It sounds like this is a really like unique treat for folks, and I gotta say, I'm sure that they're getting a real kick out of seeing like how your brain is working, and even getting to meet
Or
your
not
parents.
working.
It's kind of cool cameo. Yeah, we're on the same boat here. Okay, I got like 2 more questions for you, and then let's open it up to open Q&A. When we were prepping for this call, you had suggested the question around curiosity and
Yeah.
like how we can leverage curiosity to increase audience engagement. Just tell us a little bit more about like how curiosity is like such a centerpiece in how you approach your work.
Yeah, how I approach life and who I want in my life. I mean, it's just like people that are curious are just, your day is more interesting. Like and that means your Slack is more interesting if you hire curious people. It's just, if you want to learn and you're curious, it doesn't matter where you start, you're going to be better off, the next day. Because you're willing to explore the new ideas. And it means with curiosity, you're more humble and you assume less. So those are traits that are so valuable to put people around you. Once you get in a room in a meeting and someone's like, here's how it's done, I know it and I did it before and I can do it again. It's just like, go get your own room, dude. Like we don't want to be around you, So yeah. I think that's something that like makes life, worth living, it being curious. So that's the stories are just reflecting that. It's not anything unique about why curiosity. Like if you're a curious writer and you're a good writer doesn't know the end of the book when they start the book. Like lately I've been reading a lot of Murakami, and it's just constantly like going back and forth between the waking and sleeping world. And I know he doesn't know the end. He just has a trend that the character, if they're going down in the well, they go deeper in the well and it gets crazier. And if they're going up to the tallest mountain, they keep going up and it keeeps going crazier till they get to the bottom. And everything is just about driving the character to either the top or the bottom, and how much crazier the world incrementally gets every step of the way they go deeper. So it's he's curious. He doesn't know where the character is going, as the writer. So that's I think curiosity is just rewarded in life and it's rewarded in writing. And good writing has loads of curiosity under the surface.
Yeah. I freaking love that. Murakami is one of my favorite reads as well, because you could tell that you're seeing the journey unfold in real time as well. And that makes it so thrilling. It's like, how the hell is this gonna like end up here? All right, let me ask you one more question, and I want to leave plenty of time for Q&A. Again, this is gonna be the last question I prompt, not AI style, but like real life style to David. And then we're going to leave plenty of time for your questions. I see some questions coming in. Kim, I'm going to call you out. If it's possible for you to move your question over to the Q&A portion of the Zoom webinar, that way I can make sure that we don't miss it. So thank you for that. I see a sure response from you, Kim. Appreciate you. Okay. So last question for you, David. What stories should startups be telling, and where should these stories live?
Well, definitely your own site. So I'm a big believer in building up your own site, as like the volume of content on your site is something you can control. You can't control other sites. You can't control how often you're talked about. You can't control how many reporters are interested in what you're doing. What you can absolutely control today is how much you write and how much you post, starting with your own site, building out to social networks, building out to contributor sites like HackerNoon. Obviously, I want you to publish there too. It's a great place to publish. But what you really control is your output. Like that's completely up to you. So I always lean towards people starting there and not saying, hey, I want to pitch 1,000 journalists and get this great story in CNBC. It's like, maybe it'll work, but you're putting all your efforts into shooting for one thing that's small, and will it even drive your business? Writing is thinking. You build up your knowledge base as a business. Part of the thing that your business asset is all of your documentation and content. How much of that content is driving interest in what you're doing? So, I mean, building up on your own site is still such a great place to start. And it lets you also know what you should be pitching journalists. Much better after you've written 100 posts about what you're doing than on your first post. So the act of building up your story and telling it every day, you're building up that muscle, and you're actually getting better at it. And then you're more capable to tell that higher level story in front of that bigger audience with that bigger readership when the time comes. So yeah, especially in the beginning as a startup, documenting is as much for you as it is for them. You're really learning, why this business works and what makes you tick, as much as you're using that to market, your business and bring customers in. So I think, control what you can control. I'm a big believer of like, start there, and you control your own story.
Yeah. I mean, in this age of AI too, I think there's a different kind of incentive that's becoming even more acute as to why writing matters so much. So one of my co-founders, her name is Elizabeth Yin. She's a pretty popular venture capitalist on social media and so forth. So she puts out lots of great tweet storms or X storms, whatever we call those
Yeah, I
now.
think this event started because I subscribed to her email.
Oh,
I
okay,
think
good. Yeah, and
chain of events that led us here.
she's a longtime blogger on her own blog, elizabethyen.com and so forth. And on our website, the thing that's kind of wild about this now, though, is we're working on some projects where we're training AI on all of her posts, and it's creating like a bot that did we just release it? Let me see if I did. It's training a bot that founders are going to be able to engage with. It's called Stella. No relation to my daughter, Stella. Oh, here we go. Yeah. So if you go to hustlefund.vc, and then there's a button on the bottom right that says ask about startups and fundraising. And that's actually going to load a bot called Donkey. There's a long inside joke behind that. Her Twitter name is DunkHippo33. It's psychotic. I have no idea why still. I've asked her several times. She can't really explain it. And then where you can actually pose questions to the Donkey AI bot, and it's trained on all of Elizabeth's content. So you can, get her perspectives on like fundraising valuations, like how to think about tranching capital raises, all sorts of interesting things. So you get that benefit if you write a lot of things down. In addition to that, too, internally, we are in the last 2 years, we've been indexing very, very hard on documentation on Notion. So all of our playbooks for like, how do we do like these founder communications? How do we host these kinds of events and so forth? And that's also can feed into like Notion AI, where we can now like have a search engine on just like, if I'm going to put together an event for 300 founders in New York City, like what are like the key documents for me to review and like the ways to get started kind of stuff. So I think just like this kind of writing is pretty substantial. And I can only imagine how much content that y'all have to train like the best stuff. I mean, you could look at like look at the top 100 performing, posts by HackerNoon ever, and just like what are like some of the common things that like construct the great story. I'm sure y'all are starting to do those.
We did release. We call it the Learn Repo. You can see it at learnrepo.com, and it's it's organizing all of our top. I think badass. 2,000 or 3,000 tags by the reading time. So it's giving it. We basically have given away the data of what story creates the most reading time per tag, and on the tag, ordering all the stories by reading time has created like all these listicles, but it's pretty useful data. And we'll see, I've been following the OpenAI and the AP partnership, and I'm kind of more just absorbing a little bit of this change about AI world, so I'm using AI where I can in terms of suggesting headlines, generating images, detecting if the writing is written by AI, so there's some tools that we're default checking on every story, but the broader implications of how this near human content is going to work, it's tough. I mean, when you were telling me that story about your bot, I was reminded of Molly.com, which was an old site Chris Messina made, and it was supposed to be an AMA for all these influencers like Elizabeth, when you can just say, hey, I've already answered that question. You just type it in, you type in any question, and it brings like the most relevant content from your past interviews and your past published content. Yeah. And that site went under. And I mean, they did it before you had all this AI that could also generate response and cite it better. And it was a little more rudimentary, but it didn't work. But the idea was super interesting because like, what if you can look at everything I've ever said in the world, you could probably guess what I'm going to say next pretty well. And so that's like true. Yeah. So I'm gonna try your bot later. I'll try it out. I'll see what I can. Oh
gosh, yeah, you're gonna probably find a way of breaking it immediately. All right. Well, listen, man, this has been such an enjoyable conversation, and I do want to bring in our audience now. So again, we're gonna switch to open Q&A. Please put your questions in the Q&A section of the Zoom webinar. I'd like to actually begin with Salman's question, which he put in actually relatively early in our conversation, which is, what prompt or prompts are you using, and what AI tool for editing? I think Ling has been a little bit active in the chat right now, talking about some of the AI approach. But yeah, like tell us a little bit more in this vein of AI, what you're using.
I mean, we're ChatGPT 4, ChatGPT 3, 3.5. It depends what we're calling, but yeah, we're working with OpenAI, and then we're working on the image model side of it. We have the Kaczynski is the smallest model we use, but I'm really encouraged at how like they open source a model and then someone changes it just a little bit, and some of these smaller projects like are just as good as the bigger ones, which is
Yeah.
like from a technology perspective, just so much better and exciting and much more fun to be in whenever you don't have to, there's always that upfront cost why the giants are better. And with these LLMs, it's not always true. Maybe I can't afford the GPU that you can, but I can totally use the same model. So I mean, with the prompts, like what we put in the editing protocol and in the help section, we also do our help docs with Notion, like you guys. So it's a pretty good writing tool as well. But it's the same language like for specificity and the headline. We're asking it to read it, and then we're giving it a few opinions about how we think story should be, and then we save those. So I think I'm still learning more like everybody else about how these AI prompts work, but the first step is when can you use them and where can you use them, and then how you can use them. That's kind of more where I see the integrations happening. Like rewriting, rephrasing. I mean, we did try for like a week. We ran every single submission through one prompt that we really liked, that we thought would make it better, and it became too uniform, and it wasn't making the right grammar choices based on the type of story that it was. So it was like, okay, we learned from it. It's hard to do. You can't really do one fits all. You kind of have to look at what type of content is, and we try and gather more information about the content and more context around it. Like, is it original reporting? What companies are mentioned in it? Stuff like that. That's actually structured data, within our content management system. And that we could work towards that to, like, oh, this is the business editor. Oh, this is, the programming editor, and have a little bit different that way. But I'm learning like everybody else is the short answer.
Yeah, it's amazing too, because like if we even just go back 1 year ago, like this kind of stuff was totally exotic, right? So like content, and I think like even great media companies like HackerNoon are in for like a pretty amazing acceleration of, I don't know, evolution. I'm using all the VC phrases. Just something really cool is changing right now and how content's being developed. But I did like your point, which is we found the same problem, which is if you use the same prompt and apply all the content through it, it just starts to, it actually kind of like is a race to the bottom of starting to feel more and more deadened in terms of like the quality of the voice. So that part, I think AI has a ways to go to start to, or maybe I have a ways to go to figure out how to train that a little bit better. I want to get to some more questions here. So a few more. Some investing related questions. So one question asked is like, pre-seed investors primarily invest in people and teams. Should those be the focus of storytelling when fundraising? It depends. At the early stages, I do think the people and teams is the most important criteria to index for, because there isn't any data. But the later that you go, I think logos really does play a part. Like at the Series B or something, hopefully it's like a spreadsheet exercise. It's like, we're making 10 million in revenue. We're going 30% month over month. Like here are the acquisition channels. So yeah, that I think that's
and just relative to the impact. If there's 2 people in the room, that's what's going to be done. If there's 1,000 people in the building, like one leaves, you have 999 more. When you're towards the end, there's more inertia to keep the thing just doing the same thing without the leader. So in terms of like risk of betting on the person or the business, the earlier you are, you're the business in the very beginning. Like they're the customers, you're the one sending the form to the customer. You're the one looking at the stuff, So it's there is battles with the ego though, and you need the business to be bigger than yourself. So that's where like sometimes I've seen early stage founders, especially like people that do multiple businesses and move back and forth, and it's just too much about them. Even like look at Adam Newman. It's just like WeWork just totally blows up, and then suddenly he just walks out the door and he's getting more money for some other carbon thing, and you're like, what just happened? And it's like he's a story. He's a walking like business, and it's just, I don't agree with it, but it's like you can't deny that like he's bigger than his business, and that's like, is that good for the business? Probably not.
Yeah. Fully agree with this. Okay, I got a question for you before I get into this next question from Kim. So actually for you, David, and your family, do you guys ever do any like selective angel investing as well?
In the beginning I did I did basically some contracts. I took equity in HackerNoon. I took equity in
Okay.
companies instead of
Yeah,
that
sweat
couldn't
equity,
afford.
right?
You know, they were getting some, you know, advertising, marketing services. But we haven't set up like a formal fund. And I'd like to one day. I think it's a cool activity. It's just I'm in this, and I feel like if I
Yeah.
do that, I'll want to be in that. And so I'm really not. I'm conservative financially right now, other than my Bitcoin. Got a little Bitcoin.
Yeah. There's a whole bunch of questions about that one later, from me at least, maybe privately. But okay, let's get into Kim's question. And you do, I think, have the right context for this, which is Kim's asking, would you please finish your thought on leaning on the pathos aspect of being a VC and angel investor? Maybe you can sort of talk about like the projects that you have done consulting work for on an equity basis. Like what convinced you? Was there like a pathos side of the story or something else? And I can share my perspective as a VC.
It was much more about the people. That was,
Okay.
you know, believing in them, believing in their business, and you know, it was like, yeah, that's I wouldn't even, yeah, that's it. I wouldn't in those early stage. I didn't really, I could see them building anything. You know, that's if you can see someone building a lot of different types of things, you want to work with them. I was also just a little selfishly, I just wanted to spend more time with the entrepreneurs I respected the most and knew.
Yeah.
So that was kind of a self-learning choice. And to do it, they couldn't afford my rates. So I took, you know, a little bit of equity in some of this company. So it was all selfishly driven to, if we're, you know, about what was in that, but it's selfish. I'm saying it's selfish because it's what interests me, but that's the story, right? Like that's what they put out there, you know, that made someone like me interested in them. So I think, yeah, I'm all about the people on the beginning side of these companies. Like it's just, they're the ones that are going to make it, and it's way easier to meet a person and bet on their trajectory than it is to say, I understand how freight shipping works and how the margins work. Sure. They're going to get right into it and do it. You know, I don't.
Yeah, I feel this. Okay, so I think we're very aligned on this actually as a philosophy. So, you know, there's a little bit of context for the hustle fund style of investing. We have a unique model for how we approach investing. We first start by writing a lot of small $50,000 checks into a lot of teams. Last month, we saw over 1,000 deals. We wrote checks into 7 businesses at the $50,000 check level, usually within 1 to 2 meetings. So 0.7% of the companies we see. And then what happens next is we'll work together on a growth project with the team. And we have a whole platform for how we do this and some mentors and all stuff. But working with the team on a growth project gives us a chance to assess a team's hustle, which we define as great execution meets high velocity. And also gives the team a chance to judge us to see whether we're actually helpful VCs or not and good humans and so forth. And if we're really vibing on like each other's hustle and we're both excited about the market opportunity and we sort of validated there seems to be a lot of opportunity to chase there and hopefully good financial outcomes for everyone, that's when we ask for permission to concentrate a second and third larger check into that business. So hustle is our core criteria. And I think related to, David, what you just said is I care a little bit less in some ways about the specific idea at the pre-seed stage, because 1/3 of our companies will pivot, small or large. Like in the very beginning, they may think they're building a fintech company, but could find enormous success as a digital health business. Like it can be pretty stark. The thing that you're making a bet on is like the growth mentality and speed of execution, that this is the right team that's going to lead you to the right opportunity. And that's a part, like the winding journey that gets me most excited as a VC, is just like taking that bet. And there's been some crazy bets that we've made that end up being amazing businesses. Like one company that Elizabeth invested in.
Very similar to my hiring philosophy. Like everyone now starts part-time, no matter what, no matter the role, no matter anything. That's just what we do. You know, like there's no one, we're never gonna, and I don't think I'm gonna go back, because it gives you that window to bet on a person, try a project with them, and figure out what the beginning of what they're capable, not what they're capable of, and what they're not capable of. You know, you don't know that in after 1 or 2 meetings. You know, so I think it's cool to see the seed stage philosophy kind of fit with like hiring philosophy of mine. You got to build up together, and you don't learn, you know, in the first meeting, but you can. Yeah, I like the way you run your business.
Yeah, and thank you so much. Well, and like I guess like to round it off, Kim, for you, just like then the leaning into the pathos of being a VC and angel investor. In some ways, I really agree with that, which is like it's going to be about the team, our assessment of the team, how much we trust the team, the transparency we expect to have in that relationship. And then if we can witness growth and like growth mentality, then generally it can work out. in some ways, not always, but sometimes. I know that there's some more questions that are coming in, and I wish that we had even more time, but we are actually at time, and I want to make sure that we end on time to respect David, the HackerNoon team, but also your time as an audience. So David, it's been awesome to collaborate with you and HackerNoon to put together today's event. For our audience, I encourage everyone listening today to check out HackerNoon. They have some amazing writing in all areas of tech, and I've been a personal fan for many, many years, as it's really clear. Check out hackernoon.com. And David, what's the best way for the audience to engage with you in the HackerNoon community?
Read HackerNoon, write on HackerNoon. Anyone can write. 3 to 4 days, it'll be reviewed. You'll get a professional editor's help. And if it's good enough, we reject half our stories. But you're probably right. So I'll read you.
That's amazing. And that's something you don't get with like Beehive, Medium, like these other kinds of, is like sort of that editorial support. So definitely check them out. And of course, early founders, if you're interested in some early stage fundraising, check us out at hustlefund.vc. But David, thank you so much for doing this with me. It was such a pleasure, and hope to do this again in the future.
Cool. Thanks, Eric. Enjoy the day.
All right. Good luck to your mom too with her eye.
Thanks.
Take it easy, man. Bye-bye.